Chapter 271 Locked Away. Inside the Mistkeep dungeon, back in Losla, Jay had found 3 acid-filled shards. They were not useless, even though they were leftovers after a fight between a twisted abomination and giant warrior statues. Within each shard was an acid so powerful that it turned stone to liquid. Jay had been keeping these for emergency situations, and now was a perfect moment. Jay made one appear, and he tossed it down into the gap. One less acid shard. Boom. The fist-sized shard exploded, and only now did Jay realize the abomination pressurized it on the inside. Such a despicable creature. He thought, remembering the Manhattan Soul Eater, its soulless stare and its slackened jaw. It landed perfectly on the jammed side of the gate. The acid spattered all over the rust and angrily hissed as it ate through both the rust and stone alike. Each of them melted like wax before a flame, and with a deep screeching metal grind, the gate moved again. CRR boom. The knights below had no time to move, and none of them expected the giant iron spikes to come down. The gate gave one last screech of defiance before it dropped, crushing a line of knights below and crunching through the floor of roots vomiting out of the castle. Their armor offered no defense against the metal stakes driving through them, forever pinning their corpses to the ground. 920 X. 8 knights perished. The sounds of battle below grew quiet as the skeletons under the gate all perished next. Most of the reinforcements had stopped before the gate, but too many knights pushed through and encircled the skeletons, and were now making their way into the gatehouse. They forced Jay to defend his position up the stairs. He was a cage threat. However, Jay would not let them take him. Trapped or not, it didn't matter. 2 entrances to cover. Let's make it one, Jay said. The gatehouse had 2 entrances to it on either side, though there were 2 other ways in which led to passages through the walls. For now, though, the bulk of knights were in the courtyard. Jay dashed to the top of one of the spiral staircases, and began releasing a huge number of bones, a funnel of femurs flying from his necrotic gauntlet. The rattling bones attracted the sounds of knights below, but the torrent of bones drowned them out, and in moments he packed the whole staircase with a thick white plug. The bones were not useful for forming a wall, however, being channeled into a funnel made them into an excellent barrier. They directed some of the lesser knights to pulling bones out, tunneling up the stairs, but each time one there ripped one out, the mass of bones would shift and reform. Jay made a separate bone pile and re-summoned his fallen skeletons, giving Blue command over them. Sweeper and Lamp went to reinforce Red, while Handy and Blue forged their weapons again. However, they only made the most basic swords, copying Jay's Asane arming sword design, as they had to back up Red. 115 X. So far, Red was holding the stairs without giving up any ground. Not only was it a 1 versus 1, but Red also had the higher ground. The staircases also spiraled right as it ascended, meaning the attackers would have to use their weapons left-handed to swing, giving Red an enormous advantage over them. With the other skeletons backing it up, Red began pushing knights back down the stairs. For now, the situation was under control. Jay watched Blue and Sweeper craft themselves some swords, and as the green necrotic mana reflected in Jay's eyes, it disappointed him when seeing the sorry state of his skeletons. Lamp's skin suit was a tattered mess of decayed flesh, scarcely clinging to its bones, while none of the other skeletons had their metal armor. I expected them to drop their weapons, but it sucks that they lost their metal armor, too. They must be able to incorporate the bone armor into their base forms somehow. There must be something missing when I'm making their weapons, something I'm doing differently. As for Lamp, well, Lamp is an anomaly. I have no clue how it resummoned with its torn flesh suit. Maybe it's just a unique feature of its emerging class. Jay allowed Blue command as the other skeletons needed to rearm themselves with some makeshift weapons. When they perished in battle, their weapons did too, now sitting in a pile of bones beneath the gate, buried among their metal armor suits. Their only armor now was the spectral bone pieces Jay had crafted for them. Jay remained at the top of one staircase, adding more bones when the pit filling is shifted and dropped, while the skeletons made progress on the other one. 230 X. Red had killed some knights as it slashed, stabbed, and hacked its way down, and the dead bodies of the knights crashed and tumbled, forming additional hazards for the knights. The skeletons could see perfectly on the pitch-black staircase, while the parasite lot of knights relied on instinct and the human eyes they controlled. I wonder how many knights are inside this place, Jay thought. I guess it won't matter if we can hold them off. Good thing this gatehouse favors the defenders, and my plan worked. Mostly. We just need to clear out the knights inside the castle. Those on the outside won't matter. Outside the castle gate, knights smashed their weapons and rattled them against the metal bars, but that was all they could do. Rusted but sturdy, the bars held secure, only causing them to blunt their dull weapons even further. 230x. More knights fell to red, who hid the high ground, but it didn't escape without some damage. But Jay trusted his commander. Blue analyzed the situation keenly, and had already put strategy into place. Sweeper and Lamp went down to hold the stairs, while Red darted back up and entered the gatehouse chamber again. Standing by the bone pile, it healed itself while feasting. Blue prioritized Red's safety, as it was the only skeleton with metal armor, and would be the last bulwark in an emergency. Jay's most sturdy protector. Handy, having no armor, was the fastest. It had the duty of scouting the two passages connecting the gatehouse to the wall. It dashed back and forward through the chamber, monitoring each side, so that the knights did not flank the party. The knights saw no merit in manning the walls or the gatehouse, as they had free reign in the crucible, and there were 0 enemies inside. For now. Jay used his necrotic sense ability to keep track of the skeletons in the other stairwell, but noticed a subtle change in the pit of bones in his own stairwell. They dropped less regularly. Too suspicious. What are they planning, he thought. Only a few have died, but already they're slowing down their digging. Taking a moment, Jay hastily walked to the gate enclosure and peered down. Below the gate were several intelligent knights, all standing in a circle, making hand gestures and communicating in their own silent way. Other than the sounds of shifting bones and clashing swords, it was silent. Their behavior seemed so calculating. A string of fear stirred in Jay's heart. The enemy had underestimated him, but he would not do the same in return. They're planning something, but what, he thought, squinting suspiciously at them. Jay returned to the staircase he was holding and topped up the bones, but the paranoid part of his mind spun as he plotted his next moves. This place is defensible for now, but isn't safe. I won't let myself be a sitting duck. I have seized the initiative, but I need to keep it in my favor. As Handy dashed through the gatehouse chamber again, Jay gazed into the dark hallway tumbling through the wall. Chapter 272 Life Cycle 1. When Handy ran back through the main chamber again, Jay acted. Alright, it's time. Jay quickly ran into the passageway on the right side of the gate, closest to the staircase that Red and the other skeletons were protecting. Once inside the passage, he formed another plug with bones, yet he also held his necrotic gauntlet up. Thick streams of swirling green mana left through each claw point, and a large orb of the glowing mana appeared, mixing into the bones. It became their core, causing them to float and swirl around it. Strangely, Jay thought it seemed like an egg yolk among the whites. Of course, rather than a chicken, skeletons will rise instead. My lad, some non-human bones, too. That way, the Chimera research skill goes up. He thought, and dumped some Perton wolf, soap rat and silt wolf bones into the mix, which assured Jay that with each summon, it would make a hybrid skeleton. Jay checked the skill to make sure he used it correctly. Mass summoning. Can summon multiple skeletons at once. Can create a mana well within a pile of bones. Skeletons will continue to resurrect until the mana runs dry or the bones run out. Requires free skeleton slots. Does not sub-resurrect. Jay had only formed a small energy well of 28 mana, which would only be enough for 2 skeletons. He wanted to add more, but it was all he could spare. Many more bones were there than necessary, as some were to form a barrier. Jay wanted to waste as much of the knight's time as he could, and this was simply part of his strategy. As the skeletons are all level 4, they each require 14 mana to summon. Jay only has 87 mana, but having just summoned 4 skeletons, it left him with a measly 31 mana. After using the mass summoning skill, it left only 3. A far stretch from the 14 needed to raise. It will be worth it. He thought. Besides, the skeletons can take turns fighting, and use their Bone Eater skill to stay alive without an enemy flanking them. They will hold on. As for being flanked, well, Jay was counting on it. His intuition told him they were already planning it, and there was no counting on them to remain passive. These skeletons and masses of bones being left behind were simply to buy some time for his mana to regenerate. If he was stuck inside this castle with dwindling mana, well, he would not last long. However, this chamber was an excellent choke point, and his skeletons would reap some easy exp without effort. Jay went back to his staircase and topped up the bones again, then continued with his plan. Blue. Jay called. The skeleton rushed over, kneeling before its master and showing honor, even in this desperate situation. I'll be taking Red with me and leaving. Hold this position as long as you can. When there's only 2 of you left, I want you to retreat that way. Try to lure them as far as possible. Jay pointed past the mass summoning bone well he just created. It might be good to split up when you're a tree to confuse them even more, Jay said suggestively. Red and I will go the opposite way. Jay pointed to the empty passageway on the other side, free of any bones or signs that a necromancer may be there. Neither did it have the sickly green glow of a necrotic mana well. Blue bowed its head, accepting its duty with honor. I better make use of my Arguard, Jay thought. Blue, let Sweeper do what it wants to with these, he said, and many bones appeared, all of them oddly uniform in both shape and size. Jay dropped all of Sweeper's defensive spikes on the ground. They were simple stakes made to hamper an enemy's advance. No, Jay didn't see how they would be useful in a flat stone passage, as there was nothing to prop them up, but he believed in his skeletons, and thought Sweeper would make the most of them. L1 Lagoon witnessed the first publication of this chapter on NEOV Euros LB1N. Jay waited longer, periodically checking below the gate enclosure to see if the intelligent knights were still making plans, or if they had left to execute their missions yet. In the meantime, he simply let his mana regenerate, while many knights perished to the skeletons guarding the stairs. 1840x, 60 knights eliminated. With the situation stable, Jay analyzed one of these knights. Security staff level 4, parasitized. Type human, parasite, clone. 50 HP. Skills. Pheromone sanctity, parasite. The parasite communicates through pheromones. Diluted life force. The ultimate blessing, or the ultimate curse. No longer alive, but undying. This being found a new life force. Cranial lodging, parasite. The parasite grew upwards into the skull, and now controls the associated organs. Description. They told us our shift would be over soon. It was fun at first, but now it's kind of draining. I feel so tired all the time. Ugh. Staff. Poor bastards. Someone lied to them. Jay shook his head. I wonder if I would do the same. He scratched his chin. 50 health. Probably for the bodies of the knights and not the parasites controlling them. So, the diluted life force must keep them alive. Albeit that green liquid they have for blood, more people pursuing immortality. I wonder what drove them to it, though. The Helvetians were driven by revenge, but clearly knew the downside of being immortal, or at least they learned it. I guess these knights didn't exactly gain it, although their bodies did. Seems like something always goes wrong with the minds. The Helvetians lost them, and so have the knights. I'll bet that's why the Immortal Book attempts to change my mind first. Maybe the mind itself is perishing along with our bodies. Jay pondered, then shook his head. It's not the time to think about this. Suddenly, the knights below moved. However, it wasn't the knights on the inside of the gate, it was the ones outside. It surprised Jay, as they could do nothing to him. There were no other ways into the castle than through the gate which he had sealed. Moving to the arrow slit in the wall, Jay watched a large group of them march out through the small outer buildings. Jay looked towards where they were going and saw lights in the forest. Dancing flames of torches, more appearing with every second. Still, it was nowhere near the size of the knight army. About 30 in total. They were a force of malnourished men, susceptible to fear and pain, and unreliable allies in battle. Blandon. Oh no, you idiot, please don't tell me. Jay frowned. It was hard to see, as it was so far away, but there were faint gleams of recycled knight armor among the band of foolhardy humans carrying torches. They had followed the trail of destruction Jay had left, and after getting themselves some fresh metal suits, they saw the knights were not all powerful, and it reignited their battle spirit. However, Jay had quite a different opinion. You fucking idiots. You'll all die. For nothing. Chapter 273 Life Cycle 2. Jay watched the awkward human battalion slowly emerge from the root-covered forest and ascend the mounds of roots. It caused Jay to feel helpless as he had locked himself inside the castle, and he knew that out there, in the forest behind them, an army of 80 knights was marching. Surely they're not here to help me. Jay smiled. I didn't realize they liked me that much. I guess I was pretty benevolent for letting them live. Jay continued to watch through the arrow slit as the advancing army of knights marched into confrontation with the armor-clad humans. Poor bastards. Jay frowned. However, there was a sudden change in the humans' behavior. They quickly rushed back towards the forest. They dropped torches as they retreated as quickly as they appeared. No fight. What Jay said, confused as he furrowed his brows. Don't tell me they were just being greedy. Little bastards. Jay left the arrow slit and filled up the staircase with more bones. I guess I shouldn't expect much from weak villagers or humans. They weren't coming to save me, they just wanted my crumbs. Jay said, a sneering smile appearing. A part of him felt silly for even assuming they were coming to help. At least they will distract some of them, though it doesn't really matter now that I'm inside. Jay went back to the gate enclosure and checked on the intelligent knights. Also momentarily distracted, they soon had resumed their plotting against Jay. During this time, Jay had recovered enough mana to add more into the mana well, allowing 3 skeletons instead of 2 to rise from it when the time comes. Good. Just keep chatting. Keep plotting. Good, good. He thought, smiling at them like a predator. The more time they wasted, the more skeletons they would have to deal with, and the more knights Jay could slay. Yet before Jay gained enough mana to cue a 4th skeleton, the intelligent knights acted. Each of them split off in different directions, heading to the various passageways within the courtyard, but 2 of them went up the staircase that the skeletons were holding. Jay would not sit around and wait, so he continued with his own plan. Red, it's time. Blue, serve me well. Red appeared from the other staircase and grabbed another bone, munching it as it came to Jay. Let's move. Jay said and followed Red into the empty passageway leading through the wall, the opposite passage to the bone well. In the passage, there were arrow slits in the wall all along the way, giving enough light to see the walls, but as it was dusk, the passage itself was almost pitch black. The only benefit was it made Jay and Red harder to see as they navigated it as quickly as they could. However, the darkness wasn't a problem for Red, but an advantage as its shade vision made a mockery of the shadows. Jay assumed there will be no enemies in these passages, but he readied his Deathwalker shield, which also had shade vision. Red creeped forward and Jay followed the sounds of its footbones against the stone floor, but suddenly Red disappeared in the darkness as it dashed away. Damn. Something found us. Jay thought. Red, if there's only one, don't let it escape. Any 00V Euros LS at one end hosted the premiere release of this chapter. Jay moved forward slowly, and his shield squeezed his arm. Something was here. Cautiously moving to the side of the passage away from the arrow slits, Jay concealed himself in the darkness and readied his sword. Familiar sounds of armored boots approached. Sounds like there's only one. Jay thought. A subtle shine of armor passed by the light coming through one arrow slit, and Jay could tell it was alone, but where did Red go? Shrink. 115, X. Sounds of crashing armor filled the empty passage before silence returned. There's Red. Jay nodded. Red returned and guided Jay to the enemy corpse. It was a knight wielding a sword and shield, meaning it was of the intelligent variety. Jay continued past, moving deeper into the castle, but now he had a problem. Discovering the dead body would be a matter of time, as the other knights would notice it was missing. Damn. I didn't want them to know we came through here, and the corpse will probably cause a search to be conducted on this side of the castle. He frowned. We'll just have to keep moving. It was only a matter of time, anyway. Jay and Red pressed on through the passageways, going through the wall. They passed by a few stairs and ladders going up and down, but they only led to the top of the wall, while others led to empty rooms and pits, some filled with siege ammunition, while others featured more arrow slits for archers to fire through. Jay received a few more exp notifications from knights dying, but no skeletons had fallen yet. After a few investigations, Jay stopped exploring these areas, saving his time. The duo encountered no more knights until they came to another passage branching off the one they were walking through, away from the wall. This is it. The entrance to the castle. The new passage was much taller and had a decorative arch as its entrance. A faint leaf green glow came flowing out of the passage, and 2 dark silhouettes stood guard. 2 more knights. Damn. But are they the lesser intelligent type? Jay wondered. Not wanting to walk endlessly through the dark wall passageway anymore, Jay decided it would be better to fight. Since Red was proficient at piercing their spines, and held an advantage in the darkness, Jay decided to be the bait. But if one turns to get back up well, we better not let that happen. Jay had his helmet leave his body, entering its natural bone form. It couldn't dig into the earth, but it could still slither around. Red remained in the darkness, while Jay quickly dashed past the entrance, appearing only as a brief blur in the light, and entering the darkness on the other side. It was too fast for the knights to tell what they had just seen, and so, they came to investigate. One waited at the entrance while the other entered the passage, going after Jay. It wasn't ideal, but it was within Jay's control. Unfortunately, it was wielding a one-handed sword, a sign that it was of the parasite-filled lesser knight variety. It was a problem for Jay to fight them, but made things far more simple if they were stupid. The knight stepped into the darkness, but Jay was ready for it. Without warning, he bashed his shield against it, causing it to stumble back into the light. The second knight readied its weapon and charged into the darkness too, yet Jay ran further into the passage. 115 X. Red lunged forwards, not delaying any longer. The first knight, which stumbled backwards, received a sword severing its spine. The helmet slipped past, speeding towards the second knight. The second knight didn't even notice its ally had fallen as it aimlessly swung its sword, trying to connect its blade with Jay. Suddenly it stumbled forwards. Something caught around its feet. Looking down, all it saw was some hollow green eyes, barely glowing in the darkness, a snapping sound, and suddenly a blast of chaotic energy assaulted its helmet as a glaring light filled its vision. The helmet used its ensnare ability and punished the knight with a necrotic bolt, but it would only stall it for so long. Thankfully, help came as another shield bash smashed on the knight. The second knight stumbled back and could only fall over because of the bone parasite wrapping up its legs. Jay didn't fear any parasites getting on his shield, as it had mana burn. Anything touching it would lose all mana, and if no mana was left, health would drain instead, killing whatever dared to touch it. Red finally came to finish the job. The knight was lying on its back, so it plunged its sword through a gap in the neck. Jay stood back, letting his two minions finish it. No need to take the risk. Jay shrugged. 115 X. Make sure you kill any parasites trying to leave their bodies. Red stomped around for a moment as Jay entered the lighted passageway, glad to have vision again. Oddly, Jay's mind drifted back to the Lost adventures. They would lose their minds if they knew I was infiltrating a parasite-filled castle with my undead. He smiled. Stepping into the light, it caused Jay to wonder what he would have to kill to escape this place, while his quest was to save. While killing and saving seemed like opposites, they could be closely related under the right circumstances. I must be close to something important if there are guards here. He glanced over the corpses behind him. Well, we're guards here. Chapter 274 Life Cycle 3. 1380 X. Your skeleton has been slain. A large amount of XP had accumulated while Jay escaped the gatehouse, sneaking through the wall and finally making it to the castle. Of course it wasn't without casualty. 2 skeletons left. Jay thought, keeping track of the mass summoning spell he left behind. Something probably flanked them from the other passage, another intelligent knight, I'm guessing. It probably would have been worse if we didn't kill the intelligent knight on the other flank. He nodded. Pushing on, Jay entered the lighted passage which led deeper into the castle. The air turned from a stale dirt smell to, oddly, a pleasantly fresh forest smell. Various lamps and jars placed on the walls and the ground throughout the passage radiated the leaf green light. Instead of a magic flame within the old glass iron lamps, a glowing green fluid filled them. Jay picked up a lamp and gazed at the luminous fluid sloshing around inside. Similar to a luminous orb. Jay thought, seeing that it has the same strength and intensity of light. Novel bins was the first platform to present this chapter. It's probably produced by the plant. The knights don't seem smart enough. Jay continued through the passage and entered a large hall, complete with a luxurious red carpet. Various art pieces lined the walls, with occasional stone pillars, featuring carvings of exquisite depictions of knights. The hall itself was silent, completely insulated from the battle in other parts of the castle. Other passageways exited the hall, the ones with doors opened up into adjoining rooms, while the ones without led to other areas. It was lit by more jars filled with the luminous green fluid, making it easy to see everything. The casual splendor of the room charmed Jay, but there was no time to sufficiently enjoy it. Curious, Jay picked up a jar and emptied it. It felt warm as he touched the jar, and when the liquid splashed onto the floor, it released both light and steam. However, after the gaseous mist cleared, there was nothing left. No puddle, and no light. Just an empty jar. Oh, oops. Jay shrugged, putting the empty jar back into place. Under the red carpets were more of the plant roots, and it was a welcome sight as Jay had seen none since entering the gatehouse. They were his guide to the heart of the plant. Strange. They're not like the roots outside, trying to cover everything. They seem more functional, somehow. The roots within the room were all single, straight, and unbranched. More like vines than roots. It was like each of them had their own mission and wasted no energy on anything else. Jay followed one of the roots, leading him to a door in the hallway. Red, get ready. Jay cautiously placed his hand on the latch and turned. Readying his sword, he pushed it open with the tip of his blade. Red stepped forward, ready for whatever was on the other side. However, as the door swung open, no enemies were waiting. Instead, there were more of those strange basins filled with the green fluid. Oh. Interesting, Jay approached. This must be like their food. It's no wonder they reacted so strongly to a few of those flesh pits being cut off. The basin itself was made from the single root that entered the room, having enlarged at the base to form a foundation, with a large bowl structure on top. If there was water in it instead of green fluid, Jay would have mistaken it for a wooden hand-washing sculpture of some sort. Jay raised his sword to cut it down, but just before he swung, he decided against it. If they knew we cut the roots before, they're going to know if I cut this. The plant is warning the knights somehow, he thought. As for how it communicates with the knights, I can't be sure, but neither does it matter. After destroying the plant, this dungeon will hopefully allow me to exit, so ultimately, who cares? As for leaving this dungeon, I still need to figure out who is innocent. Plus, the needle of the starved only ever says tainted, so it's not much use at all. Everything might as well be tainted. He shook his head. Jay casually pulled out the needle and pricked the root. After a moment it turned the familiar red color. Red. Tainted. Even the damn plant is tainted. He smiled reluctantly. Jay wasn't sure how often they patrolled this area, so he kept Red waiting in one room just behind a half-closed door, while he stayed close to the entrances of various rooms he searched. If enemies came through here, they could simply hide, wait for them to pass, and hope that they didn't enter either of the rooms they were hiding in. Jay covertly entered another room, yet this time no route led under the door, so he wasn't as cautious of enemies. Inside the room was a glass table with various test tubes and other laboratory instruments Jay couldn't identify. Strange it doesn't match the rest of the castle at all. I was expecting to find weapon racks, sculptures, or a storeroom, he thought. It seemed far more advanced than the castle it was in. After a quick search, he found nothing of interest, and couldn't add anything to his inventory, so he turned to leave, placing his hand on the door latch. Must be a small research area by whoever set up this experiment, he guessed, remembering the corpse in the white coat at the top of the tower. Jay was about to exit the room, yet heard the stomping of heavy armor suits echoing into the hall. For a moment Jay smirked, hiding in the room, feeling as if the passing enemies were moronic, though as he listened to them getting closer, his paranoid thoughts cycled through his mind. Damn. If they go down the passageway leading to the wall, they will find the bodies, Jay thought. But if they don't see any knights at all, they will probably send for help. Though if I kill these, they will notice a patrol missing. Damn it. After escaping the gatehouse, Jay bought himself some time by fleeing into the castle. However, there was a trail of dead knights left in his wake. It would only be a matter of time until the knights realized he was in the main castle. We may as well slay them now. Better now than later, when they come back in greater numbers. Red, get ready. Jay cracked the door and peeked through. There were only 2 knights, though it sounded like more because of the echoing through the hall and passages. He steadied his breathing as he prepared to burst out of the door. The knights marched past, about to be in the perfect ambush spot. Jay took one deep breath in and squeezed the door latch with his sword in the other hand. However, just before he made a more, they suddenly paused. Jay held his breath, freezing his body. The knights, oddly, looked around the room and then awkwardly turned back. Huh? Jay thought. They were marching confidently, like they were on a mission, and then suddenly seemed lost. Chapter 275 Life Cycle 4. 690, X. The skeletons at the gatehouse had slain more enemies, while Jay and Red infiltrated the castle. Jay crept out of the room as the 2 lesser knights left. Red cracked open the door, peeking at the leaving enemies and then at Jay, checking on the safety of its master. Jay ignored the skeleton as he went to look around. How come they stopped? He wondered, standing over the spot they stopped. It was the same place Jay had splashed out the luminous fluid. Jay's eyes drifted to the empty jar. Novel bins was the first platform to present this chapter. Surely it's not that simple, Jay thought. They have a pheromone scent ability, so they probably use it to create patrol paths, too. Jay grabbed some more of the glowing jars, adding some smaller ones to his backpack. There were still some echoes coming through the passages, so without wasting time checking the other rooms, Jay followed them. A few of the routes led through this passageway too, so Jay was content with following them. Your skeleton has been slain. 1 summon left in the bone well, Jay thought. So far, the skeletons at the gatehouse had held on for far longer than he expected, and had brought Jay enough time to recover a sizable chunk of his mana pool. 30 mana to be precise. Blue must be commanding them well. He smiled. The two lesser knights led Jay and Red through different passages, connecting to different hallways until eventually coming to a much larger chamber. The castle itself was giant, so fitting in so many grand halls was not a problem. Jay walked into the room on a stone balcony which wrapped around the wall. The roof was so high that they could not see its top as it returned to darkness. The knights placed more luminous jars of green fluid around the balcony, and while bright, they were not enough to dispel the shadows completely. Jay hovered around the exit of the passage, sticking close to the wall as he watched the knights he was following. Together, they marched around the stone balcony and soon entered a door in the wall, which had a root trailing from underneath it. As they entered, Jay glimpsed another one of the root basins just before they closed the door. A basin room, Jay thought. Jay peered around the rest of the balcony, and many other doors similarly had roots trailing into them. There must be a basin behind each door, along with its own pair of knights. CRR. Suddenly, a whiny screech of a door opening resounded. It was right next to Jay. Without a second thought, Jay dashed back to the passage, hiding himself in its corner. Two more knights appeared, a fresh patrol. Shit. If they come this way. The door closed with another squeak of old hinges, and the marching started. Each step was getting closer. Red, get ready. Two knights came around the entrance to the passage, but two shields appeared, charging directly at them. No time to react. The shields heavily smashed into their chests. Tipped backwards in their heavy armor, they had no choice but to stumble backwards to find their balance. Thankfully, a sturdy stone balcony rail broke their fall. Yet the shield-smashing enemies were not done. As they reeled over the edge, the bastards grabbed their boots, pulling them upward. The knights tried to pull back, and for a moment, it worked. Their own strength and the weight of the armor helped to keep their feet grounded. Suddenly, Jay dropped a boot of the knight, ignoring the enemy as he went to help Red, pulling their boot up, and finally the knight went over the balcony, falling to its death. 115x. The second knight brought his sword down on Jay's head, landing a strike on Jay's T-visor helmet, and causing his mind to shake. -4.3. A considerably small amount of damage to a level 12 Necromancer, but it wasn't something Jay could ignore. Jay staggered back while Red took to sparring the enemy. His sword expertly landed within the knight's neck and guts, splashing green fluid with wriggling parasites everywhere. Jay held his shield up as flickers of blood headed towards him. He didn't need to do anything as Red could already fight these enemies 1 versus 1. However, the knight saw it would not win. It didn't turn to fight, but it didn't turn to run. Instead, it dashed towards one of the doors, hoping to pull its allies into the fight. Fuck, don't let it get reinforcements. Jay screamed through Red's mind. If the knight reached the door, then Jay's plan would be all over. The enemies would open more doors, and soon it would snowball out of control. Red dashed after the knight, piercing it in the back, but missing the spine where the parasites lived. Shit, it's going to make it. Jay clenched his jaw. The necrotic helminth responded at its master's stress, and launched a necrotic bolt, while Jay prepared to use his magic boots speed towards the knight with his shield down. Just before the knight reached the door, the necrotic bolt blasted against its armor, but only ended up bursting into swirling necrotic energies. It's already too late to use Iskian, Jay thought, clenching his jaw. Uncaring rip. It was his last hope. However, the spell critically failed, only ripping out one of the numerous bones in the enemy's wrist. It could still use its hand. No effect at all. Fuck. The knight slammed open the door and covered its back in the room, stopping Red from getting at its spine. Jay glanced down the passage he came through, but at this point, it would only be a dead end. His only option was to escape the castle, then work out a new plan. Red entered the room after the knight. 115x. The sounds of heavy armor hitting the ground rang out, then the grand hall returned to silence once more. Huh? Jay raised a brow. Cautiously stepping towards the room, Jay saw Red standing over the corpse, squishing anything wriggling with its feet. Other than Red and the freshly slain knight, there was nothing else in the room. There were no knights in here. Jay shook his head with a smile. But if they aren't here, they must be out on patrol. Red, help me with the body. Grabbing a boot, Jay pulled the corpse out of the room and onto the edge of the balcony. It was the only safe part of the knight to touch. A few moments later, and the lifeless body was tossed over the edge. Jay peered over the edge now, taking a chance to see just how deep this chamber was. Damn. The bottom was much lower than ground level, and he had not even heard the echo of the first knight slamming into the ground. It became dark further down, but there was more light at the bottom of the shaft. toy. Jay spat, giving in to his impulses. For a moment he watched his spit, but it soon got too tiny to see, and so he lost interest. Alright. We have more important things to do, he whispered. Grab some of those jars and start emptying them around the doors and passageways. We're going to break their patrol network. Red nodded and began splashing the luminous liquid all over the balcony. After a while, half of the luminous jars had been used up and emptied, the whole balcony now filled with a light mist, though it quickly dispersed when Jay decided they had opened enough. Returning to the passage, Jay waited and watched his work, and it didn't take long before some knights appeared. A door across the gap opened. 2 knights marched out. Here we go. Jay grinned. They walked along the balcony and halted, looking confused for a moment. You're grounded, bitches. Back to your room. With nowhere else to go, they both turned around and returned to their room, as if they were responding to Jay's orders. It really is that simple. Jay shook his head. Chapter 276 Life Cycle 5. 345, X. Your skeleton has been slain. They slew more enemies at the gatehouse, though they had taken another skeleton out, now using their last bone well summoned. In total, Jay had gained 3% Chimera research, bringing it up to 31%, though Jay was more concerned with his perishing skeletons, and the time he had left. Not much longer, Jay thought, anticipating the downfall of the defensive skeletons. Following the routes, he noticed most of them leading through a larger passageway into another chamber. The next chamber had many chairs, tables, and empty glasses, a dining hall. Some routes branched off from the others, but the majority led through the room, leading to a spiral stairway on the other side. Seeing no enemies present, Jay sneaked through the room. When getting to the stairs, he and Red opened some more of the luminous jars around, splashing them around the entrance and on the stairs themselves. Hopefully no patrolling lesser knights will come down after us, but they might send something up after we dump the bodies over the edge, Jay whispered, disappearing down the stairs. The spiral staircase went past many rooms, some pitch black and others containing the luminous jars. Of course, Jay would take a few moments to splash some jars around, ruining the paths of the patrolling knights. More routes crowded the steps as they descended, and after an hour of walking, Jay wondered when it would end. 230, X. More knights died at the gatehouse, but seeing the enormous size of the castle, with many lit chambers, Jay thought he must have only touched the tip of the iceberg. The origin of this chapter's debut can be traced to N0V3 liters B1N. The army of 100 must have been the surface guards. More will come up to the surface. Eventually, he thought. Seeing the odd labs throughout the castle, along with the unending architecture built deep into the earth, Jay guessed that this castle was not built by the parasite-infested knights, or the pre-parasite knights, but by whoever created this grand experiment within this starving crucible. The scientists and experimenters probably threw these people into the grinding maws of research. I feel sorry for the children born here, but it seems this crucible has raised them into monsters, too. All are tainted, after all, Jay thought, remembering the girl who lured him into the cannibal village, the villagers who only followed him to get free armor. The leaf-skin village is further from the castle, but as the roots spread, it will only be a matter of time before they turn into cannibals too. He nodded. Perhaps the true experiment was on the people living here, rather than the plant, or the parasites, Jay pondered. Traveling deeper, the staircase opened into another room, yet several knights were in this one, from what Jay could see. A thick pulsing root trailed from the depths of the staircase and went into the room too, branching in different directions, and carrying nutrients from somewhere below. Peeking from the staircase, it surprised Jay to see several knights without armor or any clothes, for that matter. Oddly, their flesh wasn't dark or rotting either, as if they had only been infected by the parasites recently. These fresh-looking men were standing around some more of the basins, each of them cupping the green fluids and drinking them. Yuck. Jay's face turned sour. Every so often, he could see an occasional wriggling string under their skin, though the men didn't respond to it, as they kept drinking the green fluids. In this strange room, only one knight donned armor, and it was a lesser type, a walking parasite nursery. Periodically, it would walk over to the basin and hold its non-fighting arm out. Splashes of eggs and parasites entered the fluids, which were drank down by the fresh humans. Like little babies suckling the milk. Probably aren't too adept in battle. This won't be too hard, Jay thought, analyzing each of them. Already, Jay had decided to slay them. Without armor, they could do nothing against his sword, his helmet bolts, or his unstable teeth spells. They didn't even have weapons to fight back. However, Jay would not use the teeth spells unless it was an emergency, fearing the explosion would attract too many enemies. Red, you take the armored knight. I'll handle the others. Jay waited for the perfect moment, and it soon presented itself. Distributing more eggs, the lesser knight marched over to one pool, its back to the staircase. Jay dashed forwards, his necrotic gauntlet hand reaching forwards out of the naked enemies. Uncaring rip, he said lowly. One of them suddenly froze and stopped drinking from the green parasite-infested pool. His body shuddered until the flesh ripped. Splash. A mixture of green and red blood washed over all the other nakeds as a giant flat bone ripped from the back of his shoulder. The scapula, shoulder blade. Before anyone could turn around, 2 flashes of sinister dark light came from behind. In the next moment, 2 more nakeds collapsed as chaotic swirling energies distorted the vision of the group. It damaged no flesh, but the necrotic bolts of the helmet were an insidious thing. Their spines turned to liquid. The parasites living inside lost control and their host's breathing stopped. A heavy blow of a shield struck armor. Red sent the armored knight off balance, and slashed at its neck relentlessly. Jay's sword appeared as a flash, and a head fell from someone's shoulders, splashing into the basin. In seconds, Jay had killed 4 of them. 4 left. Jay brought his sword back again. One of the nakeds brought their arms up in defense. One swing at an arm bathed in the basin while the other hit the ground. Pathetic. Jay's re-equipped his shield, covering his head as red and green blood splashed from the unarmed enemy. A decisive thrust came from behind the shield next, piercing the throat and exiting the back of their head. Instant death. 3 enemies remained. One of them ran deeper into the room, the same direction a main branch of the pulsating route traveled. Yet turning his back was the worst thing he could have done. An ethereal, slender skull appeared as its jaws snapped shut. Another necrotic bolt landed on his back, turning his upper body into a sack of twitching flesh. Red offered no mercy, continuing to bash its shield and slash his sword at the knight. The knight thrust its arm into the skeleton's ribcage. It released a torrent of parasites and eggs to little effect. Only having a single sword and a useless egg-laying arm wasn't enough to fight the fearsome skeleton. Red ignored its egg arm while swatting its sword away with its square shield. Raining more sword strikes, the creature's neck was soon severed. 2 fragile, naked enemies remained, gazing at the onslaught. It was unclear what the parasites controlling them were thinking. Perhaps they were immature. Finish them, Jay said casually, stepping away from the parasite-filled pools of blood. Red seemed to have its dreams come true as it pounced on the defenseless, weaponless humans. It cut off the leg of one, and then pierced its neck as it struggled on the ground. For the last enemy, Red dropped its shield and pounced. Red's sword plunged into the chest while its bone jaws clamped onto the collarbone and crunched. It healed itself while slaying the enemy. Releasing its sword, it grabbed the head and twisted sharply, breaking the neck. The parasite inside was no more. 920x. It surprised Jay, seeing how brutal Red was, as he hadn't seen the skeleton in battle against humans for a while. Well, they're still the same monsters they have always been. Giving them a roll in fine armor won't change that. He nodded. Red stomped on the remaining parasites and eggs, cleaning out its own skeleton as well, while Jay went back to the stairs and spread out more of the luminous fluid, ruining more of the scent paths the knights used to keep themselves automated, and from getting lost. Splashing some over the pulsing, nutrient-carrying route, it had little effect. Now let's see where this one leads, Jay thought. One of the nakeds ran to it, so perhaps it's a place of safety. Or so it thought. Chapter 277 Life Cycle 6. It's been nearly 2 days since I entered this dungeon, so about 2 to 3 hours have passed in the real world. Azra will wake up soon, Jay thought. When he had left the real world, it was already late into the afternoon. Leaving Heavy to guard Azra, the vampire, she was wrapped up in a new leather blanket when he left. To make another assassination attempt, Dark was still making its way back through the mountains and forest towards the mage hunters, while its secondary aim was to misguide them. As for the mage hunters, they were still cutting a path through the mushroom desert, waiting for more specialized hunters to arrive who were adept with tracking magic. After slaying Sullivan and his most loyal men, the mage hunters had irreparably damaged Losla forever, yet it was still changing. After being terrorized by the mage hunters, the villagers were already packing their belongings, while the other more paranoid types had left everything behind completely, not wanting to risk another lockdown where death would be the only escape. Anya and Smiley, Matheson, were in Mirror Reality 34 at the Third Academy, an institution for variants. Well, safe for now, each of them was dealing with their own share of troubles. Anya, losing her father, and Smiley, his imprisonment, parasite, and escape. Under the orders of Norgrim the headmaster, one particular student, William, was using his variant powers to locate Jay, but after using up all of his mana, had little progress. For now, he knew as much as the mage hunters did, which was that Jay was somewhere in Hollow Forest. The time dilation of the dungeon Jay was in interfered with his spy-type variant magic. A third group was tracking Jay, too. A novice cohort of bounty hunters. Estra, Link and Vanderby. Along with many other bounty hunters, they were after the gold reward placed on Jay, totaling 300,000 gold. Dead or alive. Yet none of that would matter if Jay couldn't escape this dungeon. Azra will just have to wait. Hopefully Heavy keeps her company. He shrugged. Jay still had the guidance, so without it, Azra had no way of finding Luna, which was a military school for the vampires. Red had finished stomping parasites, but Jay still kept his feet far from the pools of green and red blood, as he followed the pulsating route through a passageway into another chamber. Dimly lit, they placed only a few luminous jars around the edge of the room, and Jay guessed why as he saw the grotesque things looming in here. Large fleshy bulbs of clear fluids filled the room, each of them connecting to the pulsing roots somewhere behind them. Jay slowly walked around the bulbs, each of them as tall as him, round and transparent, with green and red veins traveling across them. Inside each of them were humanoid life forms in different stages of life, ranging from babies all the way to grown men. Most of them slept, but a few nearer to the light writhed and moved around inside, responding to the light nearby. So, they make their own humans, Jay thought, walking past more of them. Break down the bodies in the pits, pump the nutrients back to the castle, create more knights, gather more bodies. Jay shook his head. The circle of life is, not so beautiful. It's no wonder why their armor is so rusted. They've been recycling it. The plant must depend on the parasite knights as much as they depend on it. They're practically made for each other, he thought. Well, maybe they have been made for each other, here in this crucible experiment. Walking around the giant bulbs, Jay found nothing of interest, but as he stepped over a pulsing root, he noticed something that made him shudder. While the pulsating roots connected to the fleshy bulbs, Jay found they did not form from the roots, and the discovery disgusted Jay, as his eyes made sense of what he was seeing. No, Jay stepped back from one of them, only to bump into another, his backpack pressing against a fleshy balloon. MMM. 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 A muffled, desperate scream. Jay couldn't bear to look, nor to listen, as he stepped back from the bloated bulb with a full-size human inside the giant translucent sack. The screams were not coming from inside the fluid pod, but from the pod itself. Jay discovered what happened to the females. The roots entered their mouths, and over time, changed their anatomy. It enlarged their stomachs to an enormous size while shortening their limbs, turning them into these living growth sacs. Looking into her eyes, Jay saw she kept a part of her consciousness, as her wretched eyes stared back from the cold stone floor. The plant kept her alive, but she was just a cog in the machine. A tortured existence. Suddenly, the root pulsed, pumping more nutrient down her throat, and she soon lost consciousness again. Jay could only speechlessly stare. They're fucking people, the bulbs are fucking people. Speedily walking out of the room while holding his breath, Jay made sure not to touch anything, trying not to wake another, not wanting to have seen such a sight, not wanting to hear those hopeless pain screams again. The more he looked, the more those bulbs looked like bloated stomachs, some even keeping a semblance of a belly button. Walking out through the hallway, he stood in the basin room again, the dead, naked bodies still bleeding everywhere. I have to get out of this fucking place, out of this dungeon, Jay whispered to himself. I'm used to guts and blood, but that was something that I won't forget. Glancing at the staircase, Jay considered leaving, but then turned back and glanced at the hallway behind. For a few moments, his eyes lingered, but soon decided against putting them out of their misery. Their deaths may cause an alarm. If the knights know I'm this deep into the castle, there's no telling what they'll do to stop me. He thought. Besides, the dungeon will just reset when I finish it. With no other options, Jay walked to the stairs and left the floor. It was a floor among many that he would pass by as he followed the route, descending deeper into this horrible castle. Your skeleton has been slain. 115 X. Another skeleton died, taking an enemy with it. Looks like they're about to lose the gatehouse. I'm surprised they held on as long as they did. Jay thought with an approving nod. It pleased him having such reliable companions. They bought me enough time to travel through the wall, enter the castle, destroy their patrol paths, and descend. All while recovering my mana pool. During the journey, Jay had consumed some Bintussel root for some extra mana regeneration, and he had 62 mana. In one sense, it pleased Jay that his plan had worked so well. The plan displaced most of the knights remaining in the castle, and if he had to guess, were closer to the surface levels while he was, hopefully, deeper down. Jay continued down the spiral staircase, passing by a few empty dark rooms and reaching the bottom. However, it wasn't the bottom floor. The staircase ended in a tight passage, with luminous jars lining either side. Jay emptied a few to ruin their scent paths, and continued along, coming to the top of another staircase. The initial posting of this chapter occurred via N0V3LB11N. More damn stairs. He frowned with a sigh. Having some rations and some water, he prepared his legs and mind for more stairs. As he and Red stood still, Jay noticed a faint sound coming up from the lower staircase. Jay instantly recognized this familiar sound, and it was getting closer, louder. Marching more knights are coming from below. Chapter 278 Cross Paths. 230, X. The skeletons in the gatehouse held on as they fought a losing battle, providing Jay with much needed exp and a distraction. However, their numbers now dwindled to 3. The skeletons were only becoming better, not only at slaying the knights but better fighters. Finding weak points and gaps in their armor, dealing with their subpar swordsmanship, and working together to fight them back while taking turns to eat bones and recover. The knights provided the perfect training dummies for the skeletons, who were still growing their minds and learning. Unlike humans, they could also make dire mistakes, take risks and go all out, which made them learn much faster, and ultimately, more vicious opponents to face. Jay thought about summoning the fallen skeleton back, but decided to wait until his mana was full. Another skeleton would just get in the way and cause more noise, and the less sound he made, the better. The sounds of marching knights got louder as he stood at the top of the lower staircase. There's definitely more than 2 coming, he thought. Jay was in a narrow passage which connected the upper and lower stairs. There were no doors and no rooms, nowhere to hide. Jay wondered why they built the stairs disconnected from each other, instead of as one continuous staircase, but his only guess it was for structural stability. With a large force of knights coming up, he had nowhere to go but backwards. Damn it. I just came down these. He sighed, walking back and going back up the staircase. With his options limited, Jay had no choice but to backtrack. While he could hold off the knights in the narrow passage, which allowed 1 versus 1 fighting, it would cost him more time, more than he is willing to give. There was also some risk involved as he didn't know exactly how many knights were coming up the stairs. It could be several or 70 of them. With Red in the lead, he entered the first pitch-black room that the stairs opened up into. It was one which wasn't used by the knights as there were no luminous jars around, not counting the ones in Jay's bag. As an added precaution, he poured out some of the luminous jars from his stash around the entrance, in case there were any stray patrolling lesser knights and a patrol route in this room. Before dispersing into mist, it lit the room up for a moment, and revealed many long wooden benches arranged before a white stone altar. No time to investigate, he thought, passing the rows of wooden benches. Jay walked to the back of the room, hiding himself behind the altar, and peered back at the staircase, waiting. The luminous fluid disappeared, along with its light. For now, all Jay could do was wait, listening to the sounds of marching knights getting louder. If they do come in and discover me, I'll need to flood the room with bones, then, well, it'll just be a painfully long struggle. He thought, already making backup plans for if the enemy discovered his presence. Peering into the darkness from behind the altar, the marching got louder, and soon, a faint light appeared in the staircase. The familiar glow of luminous jars. One knight appeared, carrying a sword in one hand and a glowing jar in the other. Behind it, an intelligent one directed it, carrying a sword and shield. The lesser ignored the pitch-black room and continued upwards, taking a step on the staircase. However, the intelligent one reached forwards, grabbing the shoulder of the jar-carrying lesser. Both of them paused. It made the lesser turn to face the pitch-black room, more light flooded in. The helmet of the intelligent one turned across the room, scanning it. Jay quickly ducked his head behind the altar and hid himself completely from the light. He held his breath and watched the walls and the ceiling as the light landed on them. The light remained unmoving, but only for a moment. Good, just leave. More marching echoed through the room as knights trailed up the staircase. Jay was about to sigh in relief, but then the light got brighter. Fuck. The enemy was coming into the room. But why? I don't believe they would search every room every time they pass it. That would be a waste of time. Smash. Planks of wood tumbling across the stone floor rattled through the room. Jay gripped his sword tightly, hearing one of the wooden chairs being smashed apart. Looking up at the walls, the light was getting even brighter. The enemy was approaching. Fuck, they'll be on me any second. I'll punish these inquisitive bastards after I dig them out of the bones, he thought, but still tried to remain silent. He readied his sword. Red. Don't make a sound, but get ready for a fight. Focus on blocking the entrance once it starts. Red's cold eyes flashed a glow of green, covertly accepting Jay's orders. A knight carrying a luminous jar came ever closer. Its light caused the shadow of the altar to appear on the wall. It was now the shadow Jay was hiding in. The shadow of the altar got lower and lower, while the marching of knights got louder. However, Jay's mind was not completely focused on the fight. How did it know? How? Jay wondered. No enemies escaped, and I damaged no roots down here. We tossed some knights into the deeps of the castle, but we were still far up, above the surface when we did that. It annoyed Jay, as he was sure that he made no mistakes. He continued to hold his breath, hoping to conceal his presence. They abandoned this room and left it dark. The intelligent knights don't use the scent paths, but there would be no reason for any paths to be here. All the dead bodies of enemies are much higher up the staircase, and they probably haven't even found them yet. Yet the shadow dropped lower and lower, and in a matter of seconds it hit the floor behind the altar. It doesn't matter now. It's nearly on top of us. Jay tucked his feet in as he felt that the light source was just above his head. Any closer and there would be no shadow to hide in. He fought against his mind to keep holding his breath, clenching his jaw to stop himself from giving up and gulping in the air. Just a little closer, he thought. The light moved around for a moment, shifting the shadow of the altar as it searched for something, then stopped again. Come closer, you fucker. Jay screamed in his mind, wanting to take a breath while plunging his sword through the enemy's throat. The shadow rose back up the wall and suddenly stopped. Clink. Star. It confused Jay, hearing the quiet innocent sound of glass and stone, yet it was relieving at the same time. It placed the jar down. He smiled, slowly taking a silent breath through his nose. The sound of a knight marched away, kicking some broken pieces of the wooden chair as it went. Jay wanted to chuckle as he took in a steady, deep breath. Only now did he realize how tightly he was gripping his sword. I guess I didn't make any mistakes. While waiting for his breathing to return to normal, he simply sat there, leaning against the altar and staring at the softly glowing light on the wall. The marching continued behind him, and by the sounds of it, many knights were heading up the stairs. Jay built up some nerve and peeked around the side of the altar, keeping his head in the shadows. An unending line of knights appeared from below and disappeared up the stairs. Other than the ones passing by, there were no knights in the room. The intelligent one had left, along with the jar carrier. Letting out a quiet sigh, Jay hid back behind the altar. Looks like I have some time to kill, he thought, and took out his rolled-up swag, using it as a pillow. Propping himself up comfortably, he rested his eyes. Red, wake me up when the marching stops. The initial posting of this chapter occurred via N0V3LB11N. Jay had only rested once since coming to this dungeon, during his brief time in the cannibal village. A nap was long overdue, and the sleeplessness had not been helping his nerves, while the darkness of the castle had just added to his craving for sleep. Your skeleton has been slain. Enough already, I get it, I'll bring them back soon. Jay waved his hand, stifling a yawn. In the gatehouse, 2 skeletons are still alive after one died. Instead of fighting any longer, they enacted out the last part of the plan their master had created for them. The plan? Run into the opposite passage through the walls opposite to the one Jay took when leaving the gatehouse, then keep running in random directions, leading the slow knights in a chaotic scramble throughout the castle. It was unlikely that the skeletons would get kills during the fleeing, but it would help to cover Jay's tracks. If the knights find the dead bodies of their comrades, they may falsely attribute their deaths to the 2 gatehouse skeletons who ran free inside the castle complex. Their job had changed, but the goal was still the same. Ultimately, they were a distraction. Chapter 279 Lower Rooms. Red tapped its bony fingers on Jay's shoulder, tenderly nudging him awake. Jay grunted bitterly and cracked his eyes open, quickly remembering where he was. Thanks. He nodded, stashing his pillow away. The first thing he saw was his skeleton, staring at him with its glowing, beady, dark green eyes, yet he felt a warm familiarity rather than an icy fear. While standing up, he smiled at the luminous jar sitting on the altar. It made Jay feel a little silly with how he had reacted, but glad, too. His paranoid self had overreacted, but he would not have changed a thing. Jay left the jar there, not even laying a finger on it, in case it was a test or trap. It would be pretty obvious if it went missing, as it was the only light source in the room. Alright, let's head deeper. He nodded, glad that he had got some rest for his eyes and legs. Can't be much further now, right? He thought, and marched down the stairs. As Jay made it to the passage connecting the upper and lower staircases, he had another snack as he walked through. However, as he went to find some meat in his inventory, he found a serious problem. Ah shit. Out of food. He pursed his lips. Well, I can't get more down here, and there's not much up above either. I'll just have to go hungry and finish this damn thing. I guess this dungeon has a time limit after I'll finish it before the roots cover everything, and the food runs out. Or, before the knights convert everyone to nutrients. He shrugged. Reaching the lower staircase, Jay listened quietly at the top. Hearing no marching echoes or clinking armor, he began the journey down, making sure not to step on the pulsating route he had been following. The lower staircase was much shorter than the upper one, and Jay made his way down it in no time, though it peculiarly descended out of the ceiling and ended in the middle of a large room. A single luminous jar waited at the bottom of the stairs and was the only source of light. Apart from the pulsating root and the staircase, Jay could see multiple large pillars around, which disappeared into the darkness in different directions. Red took a few steps off the staircase, causing an echo in the pitch-black, silent room, and it made it easy to tell that it's more like an enormous cave than a room. Red, wait here a moment. Seeing the cavernous room, Jay thought to summon his spare skeletons. Damn it. He thought as he walked up the stairs until it went into the ceiling again. This was to shield the glow of his necrotic mana from anything which may be watching within the darkness. After dumping a few skeletons on the staircase, the bones floated and formed two skeletons, Lamp and Sweeper. So, it must just be Blue and Handy up there. He looked up. Jay expected Handy to be one of the fallen skeletons, though it was a level 4 skeleton now, so it held its own against the knights, as well as any of the others. Lamp, Sweeper. Welcome back. Jay whispered, craft yourselves some weapons. Both of the skeletons grabbed some bones and got to work. Normally, Jay would have crafted them some, but this time, he saved his mana for summoning. It surprised Jay as he watched Lamp form an Asane sword for itself. I guess the gut knife and shepherd's crook aren't the right weapons for dealing with the knights. Jay shrugged, glad to see its skeleton learning. Lamp gave its new sword a few practice swings, however, it turned back to the bone pile, and formed another weapon. The initial posting of this chapter occurred via N0V3LB11N. A long, slender pole with a curved end. It was crafting another shepherd's crook. I guess some things never change. Sweeper crafted itself a sword too, but even though it wanted to, it restrained itself from crafting defensive spikes. It is the rear guard, after all. Alright. Head downstairs. Jay whispered, then added the remaining bones to his inventory and followed them down. Reaching the bottom of the stairs again, Jay felt more comfortable with 3 skeletons around him, and so followed the route along. Each of them could see perfectly in the dark, and their vision covered all angles. Deathwalker's sentry added a 4th set of eyes as Jay equipped it too. The party moved cautiously, yet quickly. Jay held one hand on the back of Red's squire armor, completely trusting in his skeletons. They're kind of like an extension of myself. In a way. I'm simply relying on my own powers. One adventurer may use a spell to give themselves vision. I use a spell to give guidance. He thought, not that different to a normal adventurer, a normal person. Of course, the spell Jay was referring to could also slaughter an entire village, cull forests and mercilessly torture his enemies. I could also use the host spell and see through their eyes, but it would consume too much mana. After walking for a few minutes, Jay's eyes adjusted to the dark, and some other lights revealed themselves in the room. More luminous jars. He wondered, there must be more staircases going up to the surface. Brr. Suddenly, a deep creaking echoed throughout the room. A torrent of light flowed into the darkness as a grand door cracked open. The door was as tall as a 3-story building made of metal and stone. Move to a pillar and hide. Jay commanded. The light didn't fill the room, but covered most of it, which caused Jay to feel exposed. He and the skeletons dashed to a nearby pillar and waited behind it, vigilantly watching. Under the light of the grand door, he could clearly see numerous roots all meeting and leading somewhere near the side of the door. All the roots came from their own staircases, though there were some staircases with 2 sets of roots. More sounds of marching rolled into the room as multiple knights appeared, leaving the grand doors carrying rusted swords and luminous jars. Where are they getting all these fucking jars from? Jay wondered. The knights made a long line as they orderly followed one route towards one of the other staircases, which Jay soon thought looked like a line of mana ants. At least they're not coming this way. He crept around the pillar, staying out of their vision. The giant door slowly closed again, and darkness washed back through the room, leaving only the glowing line of knights. Jay patiently waited for them to leave before turning to the skeletons. Looks like we're the only ones here. He whispered, explore the room, don't touch the roots, remain hidden when the door opens, and bring back whatever you find. In the meantime, Jay walked further away from the root. Guiding himself by the light of his own luminous jar, he went to another pillar to hide behind, a precaution in case more knights came along the route he was closest to. While waiting for the skeletons to search the room, he took a moment to think things through. I wonder how that door opens and closes, what kind of mechanism it uses. Surely it's not simply pushed open. He scratched his chin, it was simply too big. I wonder how often knights leave this area, and how often they come back. It's hard to know if their patrols are a response force to my skeletons. If these large groups of knights are patrols, then some will come back soon, so I can't just keep watch on the door, but I can't stay here for too long, either. It will only be a matter of time before they find the dead knights and naked bodies on that breeding floor. Jay frowned in disgust, remembering the things he saw there. I'll see what the skeletons find, then we'll make a move on the next room. If I can't open the door, and they don't open it, his eyes glanced over the roots, I'll just have to force them out. He smiled mischievously. Chapter 281 Way In. 3 skeletons searched the room, while Jay idly waited next to the safety of a large pillar, impossibly holding up the grand subterranean castle above. Some sounds started coming from a nearby staircase. Knights, Jay thought. In moments, a light appeared. Another jar, carried by an intelligent knight in one hand, yet in its other hand, was something which was a cause for concern. Skulls, some of my skeleton's skulls. Jay creased his brows. What are they doing with them? He wondered. The skulls must have come from the skeletons slain under the gate before I closed it. He thought, as the others had died recently. Jay doubted they could use magic to track him with it, but whatever they were going to use it for couldn't be good. Worst case scenario. They were going to test whatever weapons worked best against the bone skulls. Best case scenario. It was merely a trophy. As Jay thought about how they may use this against him, he noticed this knight was alone, and a smile appeared on his face. Actually, they will not do a damn thing with it. It's my property. He smiled. Converge on the knight. End it swiftly. He ordered. The knight walked alone with its light and skull, almost peacefully. That was until 3 deathly skulls emerged from the darkness, swords poised to strike. Each of them closed in on the knight with shocking speed, their weapons all pointed precisely at its weak points. The knight froze. It didn't know what to do. And how could it? It had no weapons, and it had no allies. All it had was its armor, yet that proved useless as a sword pierced its back. There was one behind. Well, of course there was. 115 X. The knight dropped to the ground. A luminous cloud appeared for a moment as the jar smashed. Its armor rattled, but the echoes soon died out too. Jay listened for a moment. The cavernous room returned to silence. It was a flawless assassination. Hearing that there was no response, he walked over to the body. They tied the 4 skulls together with a piece of torn cloth, which now lay at its side in some broken glass. Huh. Mine. Jay whispered, reaching out his hand and adding them to his necrotic gauntlet. Red, looted. You can have the armor. Red had gained itself a new pair of boots, plated and angular. They fit well with the shin guard armor. The spectral greaves ran down the skeleton's shins and into a cusp of the armored boot, sealing in and protecting the skeleton's ankles. It was practically a perfect fit. Now what to do with the dead body? Jay wondered. Sweeper, you might as well take its armor. You'll lose it once we leave the dungeon, but for the time being, it's decent armor. Even though it is rusted through. He shrugged. Jay watched as the skeleton began to physically strip the armor off the knight. It was troublesome as there were several fastenings it had to find and undo. I probably should have taken the armor off the first group of knights we slayed. I guess I didn't really value it, since I couldn't loot it. Perhaps had tunnel vision for the system vision. He thought. Jay decided not to watch the knight slowly being stripped, and went back to his relatively safer pillar, giving a follow-up order. Lamp, dispose of the body. 1 Sweeper takes its armor. somewhere at the back of the room. After the skeletons finished hiding the body, they resumed searching the room. During that time, no more knights had appeared, but before Jay acted out his next plans to get into the giant doors, he sent some commands to the skeletons above, the ones aimlessly running around the castle and distracting the knights. I'm not even sure if this will work, but it's worth a try. Blue, handy. If you can, find an empty, pitch-black room and unsummon yourselves with none of the knights knowing. Try to find somewhere they won't find your bones. Jay added that if you can modify her at the start of the order, in case the skeletons didn't have the ability to unsummon themselves. As for the unsummon order, Jay hoped the skeletons would find a secret area to do this in, because if the knights didn't find their bodies or slay them, they would still waste time and manpower trying to find the skeletons, assuming that they were still alive. In the meantime, Jay could summon them and have all 5 skeletons with him. However, Blue and Handy would need time to do this, and Jay would not wait for them to carry out their new orders. The skeletons found nothing in the room and returned to Jay, ultimately finding nothing. However, one skeleton looked quite different. Oh, Lamp got some new clothes. Great. Jay thought sarcastically, shaking his head at the horror that was Lamp. Lamp had disposed of the knight's body, but also took a reward for itself. It was now covered in skin from its head to its ribs. Apparently, it needed more than one corpse to create its full skin suit, as it lost some in the conversion process. Alright. Nothing else is in this room other than the stairs, the roots, and the door. Let's move. Walking from pillar to pillar, Jay and his 3 skeletons moved to the door. Eventually, he was standing by the last pillar closest to the door. Knowing how many knights had already left these giant doors, Jay felt quite tense. We'll be fine. It's a level 4 dungeon, just don't underestimate it, Jay told himself. Jay was about to expose his presence here, so gave Lamp a luminous jar to light the way. Lamp hastily accepted the gift, however, instead of ditching its shepherd's crook, it placed them both down, with the jar sitting in the curved part of the shepherd's crook. Using a little necrotic mana, it molded some bone around the jar and fixed it in place. So it carries lamps and grabs humans with its crook. Jay raised a brow, yet there was no time to ponder over it further. Taking a step away from the cover of the pillar, he gripped his sword and shield tightly. His breathing became heavy. Each of his steps felt incredibly loud. Approaching the door, he saw that apart from various iron bars covering it, the stone was smooth. The crack between them was smaller than his fingers. Impressive, he thought, gazing upwards. Somehow, the door appeared even larger up close, as if it leaned over him. Well, I can't knock on stone, he thought. Looking over at the roots, he followed them along. They didn't lead to the door itself, but to a part of the wall near it. A hole had formed in the wall, complete with cracks, dirt, and seeping sap. They had formed a larger hole as they eroded the cracks of the years. Insidious, Jay thought. Combined and twisted together, all the pulsing roots formed a giant pipe of pumping nutrients, and all of them grouped up like this, were as tall as Jay. Jay's plan was simply to cut them. All of them. He hoped it would cause the door to open. In fact, he was counting on it. However, seeing the sheer number of these roots, as tall as he was, he didn't believe he could cut them all, not him or the skeletons. Well, the goal was to get the door open, and cutting one would do. He also wanted to do as much damage as possible. Jay held another acid-filled shard in his hand, knowing it would do the trick. Ah no. He stashed away the shard. It would be too easy. I can't keep relying on these when things get hard. I need to do it myself. The initial posting of this chapter occurred via N0V3LB11N. The skeletons rushed over, well, by my own power anyway. As the skeletons got into place, he reasoned with himself some more. I guess I don't have to cut them all. I want to, but it's more of a secondary goal. With the skeletons in place, Jay readied his sword. He wasn't worried about getting hit with stray plant fluids, as he knew from the breeding room that they add the parasites and eggs later on. Together, they surrounded the massive roots. Red stood by Jay's side. Sweeper was on the other side of the roots, while Lamp awkwardly stood on top. Alright boys, one might count. 3, 2, 1. PSSH. A deadly jet of high-pressure green fluid burst from a slight cut on the root. It pushed back on Jay's sword as it shot high into the air, and in moments, caused a green rain. Yet the root was not done. Jay had just ruined its structural integrity. He broke the seal. 3 other jets also spurted out the high-pressure fluid, and each of the skeletons similarly jumped back. It's Jay stepped back in surprise. Oh shit, oh. Shit.